My name is Rosalind Archer, and I was 38 years old the year my mother died. Her name was Dorothy Archer, and she had lived in the same house in Granville, Wisconsin for 31 years, the last 12 of them alone after my father passed from a stroke on a February morning while he was shoveling the driveway. She was a practical woman. She had been a bookkeeper for a construction company for 22 years, and she kept her personal accounts with the same precision she brought to the work, the same color-coded folders in the filing cabinet in the back bedroom, the same annual review of what she owned, what she owed, and what she intended to do with each. She reconciled her household accounts every first Monday of the month the way other people made coffee, without drama. As a matter of course, she was not a woman who left things to chance or to the generosity of circumstances. She was a woman who made arrangements. I was her elder child by 6 years. I had grown up in that house on Birch Hollow Road, in Granville, Wisconsin, which is the kind of town where the library still runs a summer reading program, and the same families have sat in the same church pews for 3 generations, and the hardware store owner knows your father's name and what you are likely to need before you ask. It is a town that rewards steadiness and distrusts flash, which is probably why my mother had stayed in it after my father died, when her brother in Phoenix offered her a guest room and a warmer winter. She had declined, in the way she declined things she had already thought through, which was briefly and without negotiation. She said, "I have a garden and a filing cabinet and a library board. I am fine where I am." I left for college in Madison, studied legal studies, came back when my father died because that is what you do when a parent is suddenly alone in a house with a long driveway and a Wisconsin winter stretching ahead of her. I helped her through the first year of that, long weekends through the winter, staying closer through the spring until I could see she had found her footing. Then I settled in Eau Claire, 3 hours away, working as a paralegal at a firm that handled estate and property law. I had not chosen the specialty for any personal reason. I had chosen it because the work suited the way my mind worked, which was careful and patient and comfortable with the long, unglamorous discipline of reading documents that most people found too dry to finish. What I had not anticipated was how much the work would teach me about families, about what people expect when a parent dies, about the distance between what they expect and what the record shows. I had processed enough estate files over 8 years to recognize certain patterns the way a doctor recognizes a recurring presentation. The details varied. The structure did not. There was a family home. There were adult children with different relationships to presence and to distance. There was a death. And then, in the particular atmosphere that grief creates, where ordinary social inhibitions are temporarily suspended, the structure of what had actually happened began to separate itself from the story that had been told about it. I had learned to read the gap between those two things: the story people told about themselves and the record. The record was what mattered. I drove to Granville most weekends in the last 2 years of my mother's life. Not because she asked me to. Because she was 74 and the cancer had arrived in her lung in the quiet way it sometimes does, without fanfare, already at a stage, the oncologist described with language that translated plainly as, "We are managing the trajectory, not reversing it." She had told me the diagnosis on a phone call on a Thursday evening in a voice that was entirely steady, the voice of a woman reporting a fact that required a plan, not a performance. I came on Saturdays. I did the driving, the grocery runs, the pharmacy pickups, which had their own complexity as the prescription list grew over the months. I learned which brand of tea she preferred, which television programs she watched in the evenings, what time she needed the house quiet for sleep, and which temperature she kept the thermostat. I learned which neighbor had a key for genuine emergencies and which one she did not trust near her filing cabinet. That last piece she told me directly. She was like that. She said what mattered once, plainly, looking you in the eye to make sure it had landed. She said, Barbara at number 14 has a key for actual emergencies. She does not need to be in my house otherwise, and I would appreciate it if you remembered that. I said I would remember. I meant it. I remembered everything she said in those 2 years because I had come to understand that she was measuring her words in the way people do when they know the supply of them is no longer unlimited. Marcus lived 40 minutes from Granville, closer than I did. He called on Sundays. He visited at Thanksgiving and Christmas, and on her birthday in July, arriving with his wife Cheryl and their 2 teenagers, and filling the house with the cheerful, temporary noise of people who are visiting rather than staying. He was attentive in the way of a person managing a relationship rather than inhabiting one, which is not a condemnation. People show love differently. Marcus had always been the gestures kind, the flowers on the right occasions, the calls on the right days, the visit that began warmly and ended with plans to do it again soon that he intended when he said them. He was also, and I say this without bitterness because I have spent a long time working through what was true and what was grievance, my mother's favorite. Not in every way. Not in the simple way the word is sometimes used, as if there is a scoreboard, but in the particular way that youngest children are sometimes favored by parents who associate them with a more hopeful era of their own lives. My mother lit up differently when Marcus walked into a room. I had learned to see it without flinching over 3 decades. I had even, in the later years, developed a kind of tenderness toward her for it, because I understood that the lighting up was as much about something in herself as it was about him. It was not a deliberate unfairness. It was just a fact of how she was made. What I did not know was what she thought about the fact, whether she was aware of it. Whether she had decided to account for it. She had decided. I found out on a Tuesday in the spring of the year before she died, when she asked me to drive her to an attorney's office on Merchant Street and wait in the waiting room while she went in alone. She said only that she had an appointment and that she would not be long. I sat in the waiting room for 45 minutes with a magazine I did not read and a cup of coffee from the machine that tasted as vending machine coffee always does, which is to say like an approximation of the real thing that has been kept at temperature too long. When she came out, she had a sealed envelope in her coat pocket that she did not show me. She said, I want you to know I've done what's right. Then she said, let's get lunch. And that was the end of it. I did not ask about the envelope. I did not ask what she had done. She had said what she needed to say, and I had, by that point, spent 2 years learning to trust that she was a woman who said exactly what she needed to say and nothing more. We had lunch at the diner 2 blocks from the attorney's office, and she ordered the fish chowder, and we talked about whether the back bedroom curtains needed replacing, and about a novel I had been trying to get her to read for 3 months. I held the sentence she had given me. I held it carefully, the way you hold something you are not yet meant to open. The house was a 2-story colonial, 4 bedrooms, built in 1973, with a detached garage and a backyard that had been a serious garden when my father was alive, and had become, in the years since, a serious attempt by my mother to maintain what he had started. The assessed value in the year my mother died was $214,000. The mortgage had been paid off 11 years before she died. She had owned it free and clear for over a decade. She had kept the deed in the color-coded filing cabinet in the back bedroom, filed under property in a red folder, because she considered real estate the highest stakes category and red was her most serious color. I knew the house well. I knew which stair creaked and where the draft came in through the kitchen window and what the furnace sounded like when it was working correctly versus when it was not. I knew these things because I had been there, consistently, through the years when Marcus had sent the flowers. I had also, in the course of my professional life, become very familiar with the pattern that tends to emerge around family homes after a death. I had processed enough estate files to recognize it the way you recognize a recurring weather system. There is a family home. There are adult children. One has been present, one has not. The death arrives. And then, in the grief and the transition, the person who has not been present tries to claim what the law or the document has not given them, sometimes out of genuine grief, sometimes out of something older and less examined. I had seen it many times. I had never expected to be inside it. Marcus had always talked about the house in the way people talk about things they have already decided belong to them. Not aggressively, not in open conflict, in the way a person references something in the future tense that presumes possession. What we'll do with the place when the time comes, whether it makes sense to hold it or sell it. The yard needs real attention, he had said once at a Thanksgiving, standing at the kitchen window with his coffee, in the tone of a man reviewing a project he had not yet purchased but fully intended to. I had let the comments go. I had always let them go because the comments were not the document and the document was what mattered, and I had been told, in a parking lot outside a diner on a Tuesday in spring, that the document existed and had been done right. My mother died on a Wednesday morning in October, in her own bed, in the room where she had slept for 31 years, with the window cracked the way she preferred it even in the cold. I had driven up from Eau Claire on Monday evening when the hospice nurse said the timeline was shortening. I had been in the house for 2 nights, sleeping in the room that had been mine growing up, which still had the same curtains she had bought when I was 14, and which I found I could not look at without something catching in my chest. She died at 11:09. I was beside her. The room was very quiet and the morning light was the particular pale gold of early October in Wisconsin, coming in low through the cracked window. I called Marcus from the hospice nurse's phone because mine had died sometime in the night. He said he would come as soon as he could. He arrived at noon, an hour after she was gone, with Cheryl but without the teenagers, and he walked through the rooms of the house with the specific quality of presence I had come to recognize over the years. A man mentally occupying a space he had decided was going to be his. I watched him do it. I said nothing. The arrangements were what they were. There was a funeral to plan and I planned it, because I had the relationships and the documents and the composure available to someone who has been preparing themselves for something for 2 years. Marcus deferred to everything with the graciousness of a man who is conserving his energy for the battle he considers more important. He called me on the Thursday morning, 2 days after she died. He said, "We need to talk about the house." I said, okay. He had prepared the speech. I could hear the preparation in it, the careful cadence of someone who has rehearsed the reasonableness. He cited proximity. He had a family, a larger family, children who could use the space. He understood that I had put in time, his phrase, put in time, in the last couple of years, and he wanted to be fair about that. He mentioned a figure, which was modest in the way that figures offered to the wrong party are always modest. He said the word equity twice in a way that suggested he had looked up what it meant in a real estate context without understanding what it meant in any other. I let him finish, all of it. Then I said, "Marcus, there is a will and there are other documents. You should call the attorney. His name is Mr. Fensk. His office is on Merchant Street. He has everything. There was a pause, the kind of pause that arrives when a conversation is not going the way someone rehearsed it. He said, "What other documents?" I said, "Call Mr. Fensk." He said, "Rosalind." I said, "Marcus, call Mr. Fensk. He will explain everything clearly and completely. That is the right next step." I hung up. I want to stop here, not for effect, but because there is something true I need to say before we go further, and I want to say it clearly. I did not know the specific contents of what my mother had done. She had told me she had done what was right. She had said it once, in a parking lot, with the brevity of a woman who considers a sentence sufficient when it contains what it needs to contain. I had trusted that sentence the way I trusted her, completely and without requiring elaboration. I had gone on driving to Granville on Saturdays and picking up the prescriptions and learning what brand of tea she preferred. I had not been scheming. I had been present. There is a difference, and it matters, because the story I am telling you is not a story about strategy. It is a story about what a woman who kept color-coded files decided to do with 31 years of paying attention to both of her children. If any of this is landing for you tonight, leave one word in the comments, just one. I read everyone and I know exactly what it means. If you are not subscribed, stay close. The part where the document lands is coming, and it is the whole point. I did not stay at the motel for long. Sylvie Ackeffer called me on the Friday. She had been my mother's closest friend since they served together on the library board in 2009, and she had heard what happened with the locks from Barbara at number 14, who had heard it from the locksmith's wife, who attended the same church as Barbara and considered information about neighborhood matters a form of community service. Granville is a small town. News moves. Sylvie said, "You come here right now and you bring whatever you have packed and you do not argue with me about it." I did not argue with her. Sylvie is 69 years old, a retired school principal, originally from Lagos, widowed 8 years ago, and she runs every room she enters with the quiet authority of someone who has spent 30 years making other people's best interests non-negotiable. She has a 4-bedroom house 3 streets from my mother's house, and she put me in the guest room that first night and made supper and did not ask me to explain anything. She had known my mother since 2009. She had been at the house so many times she knew where everything was kept, including the tea, which she made without asking. She said, at the table that evening, "Your mother told me what she had done. She told me 2 springs ago. She said she was going to make sure the right thing happened regardless of how Marcus chose to behave." I said, "She told you." Sylvie said, "She told me because she needed someone besides Mr. Fensk to know, and because she trusted me not to do anything impulsive with it." I looked at her across the table and thought about the Tuesday in the parking lot. I said, "She told me she had done what was right. That was all she told me." Sylvie said, "She told each of us the part we needed to hold. You needed to know it was done." I needed to know the whole shape of it, so I could be here afterward if things went the way she expected they might. Things had gone exactly the way she had expected. I stayed with Sylvie for 6 weeks. She fed me proper meals at a table, which mattered more than it sounds, because grief that is not fed at a table tends to dissolve into something unstructured and ambient that you cannot locate or address. She made me walk with her every morning at 7, a thing she described as non-negotiable, and which turned out to be the most useful thing anyone offered me in that period. She asked me on the 3rd day how I was doing with the grief that was separate from the situation with Marcus, and when I could not answer right away she waited, in the way she did all waiting, actively and without filling the space. On day 8, she asked me what I had loved most about her. I said the mornings, the crossword and the coffee and the 20 minutes of silence. Sylvie said, "Yes, that sounds like Dorothy." She said she was the best kind of company, which is the kind that does not require you to perform. She told me, when I tried to thank her, that she was not doing it for me. She was doing it for Dorothy, who had spent 3 weeks at this very table in the months after Sylvie's husband Emeka died, and who had not required anything from Sylvie except the right to be present without a plan, which is the rarest and most useful form of presence there is. That was what my mother had been for her. And Sylvie was returning it, 8 years later, through me, because that is how the people Dorothy Archer chose to love received her gifts. They came back around through the people she had loved. I have thought about this a great deal since. The way care moves through people and across time, not disappearing when the person is gone but redirecting through the ones they left, arriving years later to someone who needed it and had no idea it was in transit. On the 4th day at Sylvie's, I called my firm and asked for an extended leave. My supervisor said to take what I needed. I had been there for 8 years and had not taken more than 3 consecutive days off in all of them, which is a record that earns you some latitude when you finally need it. I used the time to be present to what had actually happened, not to manage it or resolve it or arrive at a conclusion, but simply to let it be what it was. My mother was gone. The house was mine. Marcus had changed the locks and been wrong about everything except that the house would eventually come to one of them. She had decided which one. Mr. Fenske called Marcus on the Monday. I know because he called me that same Monday to confirm contact had been made, and because the call that came to Sylvie's landline at 6:47 that evening was Marcus, and the call lasted 14 minutes, and when I came off it I sat at Sylvie's kitchen table with my hands flat on the wood, and Sylvie set a cup of tea in front of me without being asked, and sat down across from me and waited. I told her what Mr. Fenske had told Marcus, which was what my mother had done. A deed. Not a bequest in a will. An actual deed transfer, executed 14 months before her death, at a time when she was in full health and full legal capacity, in the presence of 2 witnesses and a notary, signed with the deliberate hand of a woman who had spent 22 years understanding the weight of a signature. The deed transferred the house at 4 Birch Hollow Road, Granville, Wisconsin to her daughter Rosalind Marie Archer to take effect upon Dorothy's death. It had been recorded at the county registrar's office on the same Tuesday afternoon she had executed it, 14 months before she died. The recording was not a formality. It was the mechanism. It meant the transfer was in the public record. It had been in the public record for over a year. The house had not been Dorothy Archer's to bequest in a will because she had already transferred it. It had been mine, in the precise legal sense, since the moment her heart stopped at 11:09 on that Wednesday morning. Marcus had changed the locks on my house. He had spent money on a locksmith to secure a house that was already mine, had stood on my porch with his arms crossed, had told me this was how it had to be, had watched me back out of my own driveway and drive away, and none of it, not one moment of it, had changed the fact that the county registrar's office had a record of my name on that property that was 14 months old and unassailable. Sylvie listened to all of this. Then she said, "Your mother was a bookkeeper for 22 years. I said, "Yes." She said she knew exactly what she was filing and she knew exactly when to file it. I said, "Yes." Sylvie lifted her tea and drank and said nothing else because nothing else needed to be said. Marcus called me that same evening. He was not the prepared Marcus from the Thursday call. He was a different version. Quieter, stripped of the script, He said he did not understand why she would do this. He said he felt blindsided. He said the word unfair twice, and the second time he said it, his voice had something underneath it that I recognized from when we were children, the particular quality of a person who has expected a certain outcome for so long that the expectation itself has become a kind of entitlement, not chosen consciously, just accumulated year over year until it feels indistinguishable from what they deserve. I said, I know it's a lot to take in. He said, did you know about this? Did she tell you? I said, she told me she had done what was right. That is all she ever said to me. He said, you must have known more than that. I said, Marcus, I think you should speak with your own attorney before we have this conversation. Mr. Fenske can give you the full documentation. Whatever questions you have about your mother's reasoning, the document itself is the clearest statement she left us. He said, I want to hear it from you, not from a lawyer. I said, what I can tell you is this. I drove to Granville on Saturdays. I picked up the prescriptions. I was there through the 2 years when things were getting harder, not because anyone asked me to be, but because she was my mother and she needed someone and I was close enough to come. And she watched, the way she watched everything, and she made the decision she made, and it was entirely her right to make it. He did not say anything for a moment. I said, I am sorry that this is how you're learning about it. I genuinely am. But I am not going to tell you the decision was wrong because I do not believe it was. He said, she never talked to me about any of this. I said, no. He said, why not? I thought about the colored folders, about the patience with which she had watched both her children for 3 decades, about what Sylvie had said. She knew what the conversation would have been and she decided the document was cleaner. I said, I think she knew what the conversation would have been, Marcus. And I think she decided she had earned the right not to have it. He hung up. Cheryl called 2 days later, which I had expected. Cheryl is the warmer channel, the one who arrives with more cushioning in the language and more gesture toward what a reasonable resolution might look like. She said Marcus was devastated. She said losing a mother was enormous enough without this layered on top of it. She said surely there was a way to approach this that felt fair to everyone. I said, Cheryl, I understand that this is hard. I lost my mother too. She said, we know that, of course. I said, Dorothy made a legal decision, properly executed and recorded over a year before she died. It was hers to make. I am not going to apologize for her making it. There was a pause that held something in it. Then Cheryl said something I had not been prepared for, in a voice different from the one she had started with, quieter and stripped of the careful language. She said, you know what I have thought about. All those Saturdays. You drove down every Saturday for 2 years and you never said a word about it to anyone. You never mentioned the driving. You never mentioned the prescriptions. You never made Marcus feel like he was falling short, even when he was. And I think he never understood that the not making him feel it was itself a kind of grace, and that your mother saw the grace and counted it. She said it without grievance. She said it in the measured way of a person who has been thinking about something for weeks and has finally decided the cost of saying it is less than the cost of not saying it. I did not know what to do with it except receive it honestly. I thanked her. She said she hoped we would find a way through. I said I hoped so too. I meant both things. Mr. Fenske handled the formal transfer with the efficiency of a man who had prepared for this moment 14 months earlier and had not been surprised by anything that had happened in between. He had done the work correctly the first time. The witnesses were available and credible. The notarization was clean. The recording date was unambiguous. There was no document in the world that Marcus's attorney could place against it. He confirmed to me, in the particular tone of a careful professional confirming something he anticipated, that Marcus had consulted counsel, and that counsel had delivered the assessment a competent attorney would deliver, which is that a properly executed, properly witnessed, properly recorded deed transfer is not a will provision. It cannot be revised by a will. It cannot be challenged on the grounds that the decedent might have done it differently if she had thought more about it. It was done. It was recorded. It was mine. The locks were changed back in November. New hardware, 2 keys. Mr. Fenske gave them to me in his office with the formality he brought to all significant moments, and I drove to the house on a Saturday morning and parked in the driveway and sat for a moment. The garden chair was on the porch. Faded blue cushion, the tie worn from the last spring my mother had been well enough to retie it herself. I had a new tie in the same shade of blue folded in the pocket of my coat, purchased from the hardware store on Route 6, because it was late autumn and the existing one would not survive the winter, and someone needed to see to it. I put the key in the lock and it worked. I opened the door and went into my mother's house, which was also my house, which had been my house since a Tuesday afternoon 14 months ago when a woman who kept color-coded folders and reconciled her accounts on the first Monday of every month had walked into an attorney's office and executed the most precise document of her life. I stood in the front hallway for a while. The house smelled like her, which was something I had not been prepared for. The particular mixture of the tea she drank and the cleaning products she preferred, and something that was simply hers, simply the accumulated scent of a person and their choices and their years in a specific set of rooms. I set my bag down. I went to the kitchen and I put the kettle on and I got out the tea she had kept in the cabinet on the left side, the kind she had preferred, which I had learned to keep stocked on my Saturday visits because she went through it faster than she admitted to herself. I made a cup and I sat at the kitchen table and I held it and I let myself be in the house. That was the whole of the first day. I made tea and I sat at the table and I was in the house. The days after that were the days of going through things, which is its own particular grief, distinct from the grief of losing the person. It is slower and more specific, the grief of the objects. I went through the kitchen first, because I knew it best, and because the practical work of it gave the days a spine. I organized the pantry, which she had kept methodically and which needed only a culling of expired items. I went through the refrigerator. I did the things that are simply tasks when someone is alive and become acts of witness when they are gone. The filing cabinet I did not touch for 2 weeks, not out of avoidance but out of respect. Those were her systems, her color-coded folders, her meticulous annual records. I understood from my years of estate work that the filing cabinet was where her thinking lived, the most private and orderly part of her. When I finally opened it, I went slowly, a drawer at a time, reading what she had wanted me to find. She had left notes, not letters. Notes in the margins of certain documents in her small, careful handwriting. A note on the gas company account about the history of a billing dispute in 2016 that had been resolved in her favor. A note on the property tax records about an assessment appeal she had filed and won in 2019. A note inside the property folder, in the red folder, beside the copy of the deed with my name on it. Rosalind knows. It is done correctly. I sat on the floor of the back bedroom with that folder in my hands for a long time. She had known I would find it. She had known I would be the one to go through the files, because I was the one who understood what files were for. She had left the note for me, for this exact moment, sitting on the floor in the afternoon light, alone in the house that she had made mine. So that I would know, in case any part of me had wondered in the intervening 14 months, that she had known I would be the one in that room, that she had not found that accidental. She had anticipated this moment the way she anticipated everything she considered important. She had sat at her own kitchen table, or perhaps in the chair in the back bedroom beside the cabinet, and she had thought through who would open this folder and when and in what circumstances, and she had made her note accordingly. I put the folder back. I went and made another cup of tea. I sat at the kitchen table in the house that was mine, that had been mine since 11:09 on a Wednesday morning, that had been filed as mine for 14 months before that, and I drank the tea, and I let the afternoon settle around me. The work of the house continued the way such work does, day by day, without announcement. If you have ever been in a room, or a life, where the work you did was the silent kind that does not announce itself, the kind that no one calls impressive because it simply needs doing and you simply do it, I want to say one thing to you before we go on. She saw you. Whatever your version of the Saturdays and the prescriptions and the brand of tea, she saw it. And if she did what my mother did, if she did the work of recording it in the one language that holds, I hope the document arrives when you need it. Leave one word in the comments, just one. I will know what it means. Subscribe if you are not already. What comes next is the part where everything becomes official. Marcus did consult a second attorney. The letter arrived from Cheryl 3 months after I moved back in, written in the careful language of a person trying to hold something back while sending it forward. It mentioned the legal theory of undue influence. It said they were not filing anything yet. It said they hoped it would not come to that. I read the letter twice. I set it on the kitchen table. I looked at it for a while. I want to be honest about those minutes, sitting at the kitchen table with that letter. Because there was a version of this story where that letter undid something in me, where the vulnerability of having finally come home after everything, of having put the key in the lock and made the tea and sat in my mother's chair, made the letter hit differently than it should have. Grief makes you permeable in ways you do not expect. The smallest pressure can find the places where you are not fully sealed. I sat with the letter, and I let myself feel what it asked me to feel, which was the specific exhaustion of a person who has done everything correctly and is being required to prove it again to people who already know the answer. I felt that for about 4 minutes. Then I picked up the phone and called Mr. Fensk. He said, "I have seen this letter before, not this exact letter but this shape. It is sometimes sent to determine whether the recipient will negotiate out of anxiety or fatigue." He said, "Are you anxious?" I said, "No." He said, "Then I am not particularly concerned." He walked me through the analysis, which I already largely understood from my own professional background, but which was clarifying to hear from someone who had been in that room with her 14 months ago. My mother had come to his office alone. I had been in the waiting room. The 2 witnesses were established and present and credible. The medical records from that spring were clean, full cognitive capacity confirmed. She had called to make the appointment herself. She had arrived on time. She had given instructions that were specific and deliberate and entirely consistent with the financial records she had maintained over decades. There was no document, no testimony, no argument that could credibly position a woman who reconciled her household accounts on the first Monday of every month as someone who had been manipulated into an irrevocable legal transfer. He said, "A competent attorney will tell them there is nothing here. Give it 90 days." I gave it 90 days. In those 90 days, I sanded the front porch boards that had been on her deferred maintenance list since the winter before she died. I found the list in the filing cabinet in the back bedroom, in a folder labeled House Maintenance, green, and I went through it item by item. The porch boards were first, then the kitchen window caulking, then a gutter bracket on the north side of the house that she had noted as loose in the fall and circled with a question mark, which I had interpreted as meaning she was not certain whether it would cause a problem or whether it needed professional attention, and which I had a handyman look at and determine needed only a new bracket and 20 minutes of work. I found it clarifying, going through the list. It was her handwriting, her system, her understanding of what the house needed and what she had not yet gotten to. Working through, it felt like a continuation of a conversation, the slow and practical kind, the kind about porch boards and gutter brackets, and whether the kitchen window would make it through another winter. The kind I had been having with her on Saturdays for 2 years. The letter from Cheryl produced no second letter. In May, 4 months after it arrived, Marcus called on a Sunday evening and said they had decided not to proceed. He said it in 2 sentences, plainly, without elaboration, in the voice of someone who has made a decision and is reporting it without dressing it up. I said, "I appreciate you telling me directly." He said, "I should, you always do." It was the closest thing to acknowledgement he had offered me in years. I took it without comment, as the small, true thing it was. Sylvie comes for dinner on the second Sunday of every month. She brings wine that is better than what I would have thought to buy, and she has strong opinions about the garden and the back bedroom curtains, and whether the kitchen needs repainting, most of which I have acted on because she tends to be right. We eat at the table where my mother ate for 31 years, and we talk about books and the library board and the ongoing small dramas of Granville. And sometimes we talk about Dorothy, in the way that people talk about someone who is present in all the rooms even when they are no longer in them. Sylvie told me once, over the second glass of wine, that my mother had been more deliberate about the deed than she had let on to either of us. That she had thought about it for at least 2 years before she acted on it. That she had watched both of her children during those years with the specific attention of a woman reconciling an account she wanted to balance before she closed it. She had watched Marcus arrive for Thanksgiving and Christmas and July. She had watched me arrive on Saturdays. She had done the math. I said, "Do you think she worried about Marcus?" Afterward, Sylvie said, "I think she knew Marcus would be hurt. She did not think he had earned the right to be more than hurt." She said it plainly, the way my mother would have said it, which is why my mother had chosen her. I retied the garden chair cushion in April when the weather allowed it. I used the same shade of blue, the new tie from the hardware store, and I did it in the way I imagined my mother had done it, not reverently but practically, because a cushion tie that needs replacing is not a ceremony. It is a small task that keeps the thing intact for one more season. I thought about her hands while I did it. I thought about how many Aprils she had done the same thing without anyone seeing her do it, the way she did most of what she did. Marcus and I speak occasionally. We have not been in the house together since before her death. I have not asked him to come, and he has not asked to, and I understand that the distance between what happened and whatever comes next has its own timeline that is not mine to set. Some distances close and some do not. I do not yet know which this one will be. He called on a Sunday in October, almost a year after her death, which I think he had noted on his calendar or noticed arriving, because that is the kind of thing that surfaces in people even when they are not fully attending to it. He asked how I was doing in the house. He did not ask it formally. He asked it in the voice of a person who has been wondering about the answer for a while. I said, "It is different than I expected." In the way that being in a place where someone lived is always different than you expect after. It is full of them, and also they are not there, and those two things do not resolve. He said, "Yes." A pause. He said, "I used to think of it as mine. I want you to know that I know that was wrong, not because of the deed. I mean before the deed. I used to think of it as mine in a way that had nothing to do with whether I'd earned that. I said, I know. He said, she knew it too. I said, yes, she did. He said, I keep thinking about that July, her birthday. I sent the flowers and called from the car on the drive back. You were there the whole weekend. I said, you have said that a couple of times now. He said, I think I need to keep saying it until it means the right thing to me. I said, I think that's fair. He said he hoped the house was good to me. I said it was. He said he was glad. We said goodbye in the way of people who have found a register that is not warmth yet but is not distance either, something that might, with time, become something more. I sat with the phone in my hand after and thought about my mother, about what she had seen from that house, about the 31 years of Saturdays and Julys and what she had written down in the margins and filed in the color-coded folders. She had seen him too. That was the thing I had not said, and perhaps should. She had seen him as clearly as she had seen me. She had not stopped loving him or accounted for him as absent. She had simply, with the precision of a bookkeeper who had been watching both ledgers for 30 years, put things where they belonged. The house was not a punishment. It was an accuracy. That distinction matters to me. I need it to be true, and I believe it is, because I knew her and she was not a cruel woman. She was a precise one. And what precision requires, when the two sides of the ledger do not balance, is that you find the error and correct it, not in anger, but in the quiet, steady way of someone who simply will not let a wrong entry stand. What I know is this. My mother sat in a chair in this house for 31 years. She reconciled her accounts on the first Monday of every month. She kept her records in color-coded folders, and she reviewed them annually, and she understood the difference between what was recorded and what was merely assumed. When the time came to make the most important entry of her financial life, she drove herself to an attorney's office on a Tuesday afternoon, and she executed it correctly, and she had it filed at the county registrar the same day. And then she went to a diner and ordered fish chowder and talked about curtains, and whether I was ever going to finish the novel she had been trying to get me to read. She did not tell me what she had done. She told me she had done what was right. She knew that was enough for me because I had spent 38 years becoming the kind of person for whom it was enough, and she had been watching. I think about the afternoon Marcus changed the locks sometimes. Not often, not with anger. I think about what he must have felt, standing on that porch. The satisfaction of having moved quickly, of having arrived first, of having secured a thing before anyone could stop him. He had secured a thing that was already mine. I think about slipping the deed under the door, which I did not actually do. The title takes a small liberty with the order of events. What I did was simpler and less dramatic. I drove to Sylvie's house and let the document make its own way to Marcus through Mr. Fensk, the way my mother had intended. I did not have to do anything. She had already done it. She had done it on a Tuesday afternoon 14 months before I needed it, in the specific way of a woman who keeps her important papers filed correctly and understands that the record speaks for itself. There is something I want to say about that, about the gap between what the title promises and what the story actually was, because I think it matters. I did not win anything. I want to be clear about that. There was no confrontation where I produced the document at the right moment and watched someone's face change. There was no dramatic arrival on a porch with a folder. There was a locksmith and a motel and 6 weeks at Sylvie's house, and a Monday phone call from an attorney and 14 months of a document sitting in a county registrar's office waiting to be what it was. The quiet of it was the whole point. My mother had understood that a fight conducted through documents is not a fight at all. It is just a record, and the record had been made correctly, and when the record was produced, there was nothing for anyone to fight about. Marcus could be upset. He could feel blindsided and unfair treated and whatever else he felt. None of it changed the date stamped at the bottom of the transfer. None of it changed that she had walked into an office alone, of her own will, in full clarity, and signed her name, and that the signature was witnessed and notarized and recorded. She had taken the fight out of it entirely before it could begin. That was not coldness. That was, I have come to believe, an act of love for both of us. She had decided that she did not want her death to be the occasion for her children to become enemies, and she had done the one thing available to her to prevent it, which was to make the outcome not subject to argument. You cannot argue with a date stamp. You can be hurt by it. You can be angry at the person who made it. But you cannot change it, and eventually, if you are Marcus, you find a Sunday evening when you call your sister and say you keep thinking about July. The lock was mine. The door was mine. The house was mine and had been mine, and the spring light comes in through the east window the way it always has, and the garden chair is on the porch with the cushion properly tied. And some mornings when I make the tea I use her cup, the one from the cabinet on the left, and I sit at the kitchen table in the house she kept for 31 years, and I let myself know that she saw me. She saw me. She wrote it down. She had it recorded. That is the whole of what I needed from her, and she knew it, and she gave it in the only language she fully trusted, which was the language of a properly executed document filed in the right place at the right time by a woman who had spent 22 years, knowing exactly what it meant to put a signature where it belonged. That's my story. One woman who drove to Granville on Saturdays and learned what brand of tea her mother preferred, and never once made it a competition. One deed recorded at the county registrar's office on a Tuesday afternoon, 14 months before anyone needed it to be there. And a front door that opened when I put the key in, on a Saturday in November, in the quiet way that things done right always eventually do. If someone in your life shows up without keeping score, without waiting to be noticed, without making the showing up into an argument, I hope you find a way today to let them know what you see. Because the people who do the steady work, the Saturdays and the prescriptions and the porch boards and the cushion ties and the brand of tea, they are not waiting for a reward. They are just there. And being there, it turns out, is the whole document. Leave one word in the comments. I read every single one and I know exactly what it means. If this story stayed with you tonight, share it with someone who needs it. Subscribe so you are here for the next one. I'll see you then.